Schiff, and Rob Simmons. Well, candidates, good evening, and again, thank you very much for coming. I've been informed by the committee that the opening statements will be 4 minutes in duration. And so, Linda, we will begin with you. Good evening.
Good evening, Dan. Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank our RTC chairs who are here this evening, and also our first selectman for a minute, I forgot what town I was in because I've been traveling to so many towns, but Avon and Canton, I'm very pleased to be here tonight to speak to you.
Gentlemen, Peter Schiff.
I'll just keep it brief. Let me thank everyone that Linda thanked.
Did you remember what town we're in?
Canton. At least that's with the GPS. But anyway, I'm a big businessman. I'm an entrepreneur. I run an investment brokerage firm based in Westport, Connecticut. I was born here in Connecticut, but I lived most of my life out in California. But I have a very strong track record as a private citizen of identifying problems in advance. You know, earlier in my career, in the late 1990s, I was screaming as loud as I could to anybody who would listen that there was a bubble in the stock market, in the NASDAQ, and in the internet stocks in particular. I forecast that bubble not after it burst, but while it was forming in 1997, 1998. I warned exactly what was going to happen to the market when the bubble burst and what was going to happen to the economy. In the aftermath of the bursting of the NASDAQ bubble, I made a similar observation regarding the housing bubble. As early as 2002, I began criticizing the monetary policy of Alan Greenspan and the regulatory policy of our government, the policies of Freddie and Fannie. I warned about a housing bubble that was being inflated by reckless monetary policy and legislation. I became so worried about the enormity of the problem that I authored a book. I wrote most of it in 2005 and 06. It came out in 2007, called Crash Proof: How to Profit from the Coming Economic Collapse. In that book, I forecast the credit crunch and financial crisis of 2008, the largest recession since the Great Depression, and just about everything that happened to our economy in that year. The problem that we have, and the problems that I see, is that the government today is repeating all of the mistakes that created the NASDAQ bubble and that created the housing bubble. And unfortunately, I feel that the economy is now headed for an economic cliff. See, the problem is everything the government has done to solve the problems has actually made it worse. We have some very serious structural, fundamental problems underlying our economy that have to be allowed to be worked out. Unfortunately, every time the government stimulates the economy, it stimulates the problems, and it inhibits the cure. As a nation, we need to spend a lot less money. Individuals have to spend less money, and the federal government has to spend a lot less money. You see, what we need in this country is more savings. We're not going to have more jobs, we're not going to have business growth unless businessmen can get capital. And capital comes from savings, and savings comes from underconsumption. Unfortunately, we're doing everything wrong. We're continuing to pour gasoline on a fire and expecting to put the fire out. But the fire is going to keep raging until somebody goes to Washington and does something about it. I mean, Linda just said she doesn't understand the economic policies because they're incomprehensible. They don't make any sense, and there's nothing to understand. We are doing everything wrong. The problem is the government is too big, so it has to shrink. Our politicians are trying to tell us that we stimulate the economy by making the government bigger. But the bigger the government gets, the smaller the private sector has to shrink, because the government is depriving the economy of the resources it needs. The more job bills the government passes, right now the president wants a new jobs bill. Well, the more bills that we pass to create jobs, the more jobs we're going to destroy. Jobs can't come from government, they have to come from the private sector. And so the reason that I want to run is to bring some common sense and an economic understanding to Washington, D.C. Because none of the senators that are sitting in office today have a clue why the country is in so much trouble. They're blaming capitalism, they're blaming the free markets, they're blaming greedy people on Wall Street. The fact of the matter is we're in trouble because of Washington policies. It's not the free market that failed us, but the government that failed us, but the Federal Reserve that failed us. and somebody needs to go to the United States Senate and really lead a revolution in the
Peter,
Republican
your time is
Party
up.
and change. Anyways, thank you.
Thank you, Peter Schiff. We hear that one of the reasons the Democrats won control of the Congress 5+ years ago was because the Republicans strayed from the Republican philosophy. So our first question tonight to the candidates is, what is the Republican philosophy, or what should that philosophy be? Linda, we begin with you. Thank you, Linda. Peter Schiff.
Well, you know, the problem with Republican principles is they often conflict with the political ambitions of the Republicans that we send to Washington. Once they get there, they check their principles at the door, and they care more about their own re-election and perpetuating their own careers. And so they grow government, they expand government. And I think a lot of Republicans feel betrayed by the people that we've elected, and oftentimes when we go to the polls, we end up holding our nose and voting for the lesser of two evils. But what I'm trying to do is give Republican voters the opportunity to vote for somebody and not against somebody. I don't have political ambitions. I'm going to the Senate because the country is in trouble. And when I get there, I'm going to bring Republican principles back to the Republicans in Congress right now who forgot them. And those principles are limited government, which means shrinking government, which means repealing legislation, not passing it, which means respect for the Constitution and individual liberties. I guess I'll end on that.
All right, Peter, on healthcare. Thank you. The President of the United States is revisiting the issue. He did in his interview on Sunday night before the Super Bowl. And he says he wants to sit down with Republicans and hear their specific ideas on healthcare reform. So,
Well, first of all, what's happening with healthcare costs is the perfect example of why we want to keep the government out of the economy. And first of all, when the private sector or free market capitalism is allowed to function, prices come down and quality goes up. We see that in every place where the government is not involved. Look at laptop computers, look at plasma TVs, look at cell phones. We have to ask ourselves, why is free market capitalism not working in healthcare? It's not working because the government won't let it work. If the government got out of the way, we would have a much more affordable healthcare system. Everything that Rob Simmons said is true, but the overriding problem is the subsidy for insurance. The government created a system through the tax code where everybody is now getting their insurance through their employer. Why is that? Why do we get health insurance when we get a job? We don't get fire insurance, we don't get life insurance, we don't get car insurance. It's all because of the tax code. And this has created a system of third-party payers where people are trying to get their health care paid for through insurance instead of using insurance for what it should be, for catastrophic things. What I would like to see happen for real reform that will cost nothing is for the federal government to allow workers to go to their employers who are now providing them with tax-free health insurance and opt out and take the wages tax-free instead. So if your employer is giving you $10,000 worth of health insurance, you can ask your employer, I don't want that health insurance, I'll take the $10,000 tax-free. And then you take that money and you shop around and you buy the type of health insurance that you want, that you have with you forever. You're not going to lose it when you lose your job, and you can find a less expensive plan, and you can put the difference tax-free in your pocket. That's a massive tax cut. It doesn't cost the Treasury one penny. All it does is take money out of the insurance companies and puts it back into the pockets of average Americans.
Peter Schiff, Congressman Simmons, we thank you very much.